This is Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline. I'm your host, Monica Hadley, and with me is my mom, Caroline Kilborn.
And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Writers' Voices. We have a very interesting book to talk about today.
Oh, isn't this one fun?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
And, in fact, we had a little... it wasn't too easy to schedule this interview. We had a couple of misstarts on it, and I'm really happy we finally found a date that worked.
I am too.
So who do we have in store today?
The author is Richelle Mead, and she is the author of the international #1 bestseller Vampire Academy series. It's and its best-selling spin-off series Bloodlines, and the fantasy standalone Soundless, so she has quite a reputation already. A lifelong reader, Richelle has always had a particular fascination with mythology and folklore. When she can actually tear herself away from books, either reading or writing them, she enjoys bad reality TV, traveling, and shopping for dresses to wear on tour. She is a self-professed coffee addict, works in her pajamas, and has a passion for all things wacky and humorous. Originally from Michigan, she now lives in Seattle, Washington, where she is hard at work on her next novel. We'll have to talk about that later on. Okay, so today is The
Glittering Court by Richelle Mead. Welcome to Writers' Voices, Richelle.
Hello, thanks for chatting with me today.
And I'm guessing you're on tour today, too.
I am. I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin right now. I have a book signing in about an hour and a half or so, and then I'll be driving on to Chicago for another event tomorrow.
And how long have you been on the road?
It's been off and on for the last 6 weeks. The book came out April 5th, and I did 2 weeks of touring, took a break, went to a convention, took another couple weeks off, and now I'm here in the Midwest. I was in St. Paul last night, Milwaukee today, and then Chicago, and then finally home for a while.
And what are you write primarily for young adults, is that correct?
Yes, I also do have an adult series that's it's less I don't know what the word is, less frequent, so it doesn't come out as much as the young adult ones. They're what I'm most known for.
So is your audience mostly teenagers when at your tours?
I'd say about 3/4 are. That might be maybe 2/3. I have a fair amount of adult readers. Young adult is so sophisticated these days that it does have a huge adult audience, and I do have adults reading my adult fiction as well. So I do get a good percentage at my events. Yeah,
well, I mean that's absolutely true. I think some of the best books now are young adult. You know, it's certainly not a lesser than category than adult fiction.
No.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Actually, you have older adult fans like myself.
It's for everyone. Books are for everyone. It's all labels and marketing. Read what you want.
Yeah, sure.
So The Glittering Court, this is your first book in a new series, am I to understand?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So tell us how this series came about.
Oh, there's a few different things behind this series. Personally, I just wanted to go on to a new world. As a writer, you always want to try different things. I have a lot of story ideas, not just vampires. That's the one that hit, and so I get associated with that. But I've always loved fantasy, and for me, I just see a lot of fantasy kind of follows in the steps of Tolkien, and there's nothing wrong with that. But these fantasy worlds are often based sort of in the ye old medieval England type setting, and so I wanted to do a fantasy that was a spin on another world. And so the setting for this, it's meant to kind of resemble vaguely Elizabethan England, age of exploration, and then early colonial America with some frontier life thrown in. So it's still a made-up world, but you'll see parallels in that. So that was one of my motivations for this. Another reason I wanted to write it is, I got a lot of acclaim for Vampire Academy because the heroine's very strong. She's out there. She, can hold her own in a fight, and I love that about her. But sometimes I feel that in fiction, the only way women are seen as strong is if they are essentially acting like men. You know, they're in fist fights and wearing leather, and I think that does a disservice to women, because women are strong in a lot of ways. They're strong in their relationships, their choices, and so I wanted to create this series where you look at it ostensibly these girls in ball gowns going off on arranged marriages, but they are tough in different ways. You know, they make choices, they take control of their lives, and I was really inspired to do a different kind of series where we can see female strengths in other ways.
I think that's a wonderful idea, and I think you've done really well with that.
Mm-hmm. These girls are definitely, well, they're in a position where they have to take orders, but they're still in charge, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they particularly the heroine takes charge of her life in a way that is very brave.
Indeed.
Yeah, and very risky.
Indeed.
But it's interesting because I could definitely see the parallels between, like, say, Elizabethan England and colonial America, but it is very different too. It's not exactly historical. It reminds me a little bit of I don't know if you're familiar with Orson Scott Card's Seventh Son series, which was a fantasy series that was set in a new world that was very different from, I mean, it was America, but it was if history had turned out very differently.
Oh, okay. No, I'm not familiar with that series.
Yeah.
I know his other works. No, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it was, or actually it was the Alvin Maker series. He was a seventh son. And this was probably 30 years ago he wrote these books. And
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't know those. I know a couple other fantasy authors, like Guy Gabriel Kay, Jacqueline Carey, who've created worlds that are these sort of faux historical worlds. You know, they're fantasy, different names, different places, and different things. But you definitely see, you know, the parallels to our world. And no one's really sure what to call this genre because it's not historical. And then some people argue it's not fantasy if there's not a lot of magic in it. So I don't know what you term it. I'm waiting for someone to tell me so that I can.
Alternate reality.
Maybe that's the
There you go. There you go.
Sometimes I feel like that. Well, maybe it is. Yeah, because people not to be confused with alternate history, you know, which is where you are basing it now. But yeah, alternate reality. I kind of like historically inspired alternate reality.
Yeah, right.
But it's tough. It goes back to labels and marketing, right? You know,
Exactly.
Wish we could just focus on the story, but people like categories.
So how much research into those historical times did you do? You know, because it's not historical fiction, you didn't have to get everything as accurate, perhaps, as you would if you were writing writing historical fiction. But your settings do seem very real. You have a lot of details that I'm assuming you must have done some research.
Yeah, and I don't know that I can quantify how much I did, but you know, I did. There were different aspects I had to look at, particularly in colonial America. The early colonies were settled for very different reasons, and I sort of explore that in here. You've got kind of the merchant, money-making ones. You know, they're set up for trade, and then you have groups that were going for philosophical reasons. And this book in the series doesn't touch on those so much, but we'll see a little bit more in others. These colonies settled by people of different religions, and then when we moved to frontier life in this, I kind of jump ahead and borrow from Gold Rush, California for that part. I had to do research into gold mining methods and sluices, which are these things that sit in the river and kind of collect gold dust, which was fascinating. I had no idea how a lot of that worked.
Well, the concept of religious freedom, or the principle of religious freedom, plays very heavily in this book.
It does. Even though we're not, focused in a religious colony for this book in the series, we do meet some people who are considered heretics in this world. The accepted religion, the traditional Orthodox, whatever you want to term it, is a monotheistic faith, worshiping a god generally regarded as masculine, and he has these angels that serve him. And the heretics sort of see the angels as almost gods in their own right, and some of the angels who are seen as dark in the traditional faith, these heretics sort of elevate. And that is inspired by what I studied in my master's degree. I have a master's in comparative religion, and my thesis was on actually heretical Christianity in the Roman Empire, where you had some of these things. People were arguing about the nature of the Trinity. You know, is Jesus a different God? Is he a saint? You know, and there were a lot of factions who were arguing over, you know, how to classify that, and that's kind of what this is inspired by.
That's really interesting because we just did an interview with Julie Berry with the book The Passion of Dulce, which was about heretics, Christian heretics. It's a historical fiction about Christian heretics in the southern France area in the 1300s. And
oh, interesting.
Yeah, I know.
It was. Yeah.
It's like all these parallels. Have you? I think it's fascinating that you have a master's in comparative religion. Have you used that knowledge in any of your previous books?
All of my books usually have some element of religion or mythology. I mean, even the Vampire Academy books. I mean, that's the basis for that film, the Vampire Civilization, and that is inspired by some Romanian myths I had studied about. You know, they had these different races of vampires, living ones and dead ones, and that was where I built that from. And my first two series were actually for adults, still in urban fantasy, paranormal genre. But same kind of thing. You know, one of them was about a succubus, which draws heavily from sort of offshoots of Christianity, dark creatures, and that. Another one was dealing with fairies and demons, so it was drawing more on folklore. But those are areas that interest me, and so there's always a little something that I like to put in there.
Was getting back to Count Dracula? He was a real person, but was he from Romania?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on his name. The Dracula. He had a different name than we know him, but yeah, there is a historical figure. Not quite like what the Bela Lugosi movies would have you believe, or you're turning into a bat or anything like that. But he was kind of this a dark figure, again surrounded in legend and myth. Hard to know what the real man was actually like.
You know, the other thing I wanted to ask you, you had made reference to when Cedric was talking to the main character to Adeline about the New World, and the fact that there was a place where everyone was going to be welcomed, a section. I was wondering if that might have been William Penn's Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it was inspired by that.
I thought so.
Very much so. You know, we saw in American history, you've got some colonies that were strictly, you know, this is our religion. But yeah, you did see that with William Penn and the Quakers. They did have this very open sort of attitude, which is really wonderful. And so absolutely, that was an inspiration.
My 11th or 13th great grandfather received a land grant from William Penn. They were Mennonite and settled in Pennsylvania way back in the late 1600s. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I have Mennonite ancestors too.
Do you?
They settled in Pennsylvania. That's funny.
Oh, wow.
They came over from Germany and Switzerland.
Yep, it was probably the same bunch.
Everyone's related at some point.
I know. It was the leaders of that particular group were Hans Herr, and my maiden name was Herr, and Martin Milan. So I don't know if that's what you trace your roots back to one of those guys.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. I think Frick and Andres are mine, but who knows? They may have all known each other.
Probably.
Right.
Probably. And they came to Lancaster County.
Yeah, that's where mine were too.
Yeah.
We might be distant cousins.
We
Who
probably
knows?
are. We probably are. Well, tell us a little bit more about the story of the Glittering Court.
So the Glittering Court itself is this business/school, I guess, back in the old world, where the family who runs it, the Thorne family, they kind of find either impoverished girls or girls who are like the 10th daughter, or somebody without a lot of prospects, and they kind of train them up to be ladies. I always think of My Fair Lady and Eliza Doolittle, but you give them history lessons, etiquette lessons, and so like in a year's time, they sort of pass themselves up in high society, and they're sending them off to make arranged marriages in the new world, where you have these men who have kind of probably come over from also humble backgrounds, just as happened in history, and they find their fortunes through hard work and whatnot over there, and so they're able to come over with this crop of girls and say, here they are, and hopefully get bids from the well-to-do suitors. And there's some precedent for that. I actually had no idea when I wrote this, that it historically the early colonies, men outnumbered women 3-1, and there were a few entrepreneurs who did try to ship women over. There was no glamorous finishing school like I've created. I think basically the only requirement was you had to be female, but they were trying to bring over wives for these men that desperately needed them, and they were trading them, I think, I read like bushels of tobacco in Virginia, and sort of that.
They were trying to populate the colonies.
That was a surprise to find that out.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the setup, and there's 3 books, and each one's told by a different girl. In this first one, there's this young woman she's born to the nobility, but like a lot of nobles later in England, they had their title, but they ran out of money, and so she's not happy with her marriage prospects, and so she ends up disguising herself, taking on the identity of a commoner, the kind of girl that the Glittering Court takes on. And it's kind of this weird thing, because she's a noble pretending to be a commoner who's training to be a noble, actually. And so she has to do this kind of weird balancing act to not let on that she actually knows all the things they're already trying to teach her, more so than the other girls, actually, because that's been her life until this point. And so that's sort of the first part of the book, is her going through this, and then in the next section we actually get to the new world and start seeing the adventure unfold.
And who are the girls that are telling in the other 2 books? Who are the main characters?
So she has 2 friends in this first book that she's quite close to. One of them is named Mira, and she's from a country that culture and language is sort of meant to resemble Spain in this era, except that it's pretty deep into a civil war at the moment. And so she has come from a background with a lot of tragedy and war atrocities, and so she's kind of got this tough exterior as a result, but at the same time she's seen so much horror that she wants to sort of right the wrongs of the world. She's got this fierce sense of justice, and so she's the narrator of the second book. And then in the third book, the other girl we meet is her name is Tamsin, and she's kind of from the lower classes of Oxford, the country it starts in, and she's hyper motivated to the point where you just kind of want to calm her down a little bit. She's so dedicated to being the best in the Glittering Court. She wants to do everything. She 100% isn't trying hard enough as far as she's concerned, and she's got this kind of frenetic pace of life. And when we get to her book, we'll find out why. These books, they're not sequential. Actually, I don't know that a lot of people know this. So it's not as though book 2 continues on from book 1. Actually resets to the beginning of the timeline, and we learn it from Mira's point of view. We find out how she got involved with the Glittering Court and what her experiences are, because each girl is actually they've got their own set of adventures, even though they overlap in some parts. And so you could read the books out of order. You could pick up any of them, and you've got each girl's complete story. But, as you work your way through all three, you get a lot of questions answered. And things that seem completely inconsequential in one book may have a lot of meaning in the other. So, for example, you're reading this first book, and maybe someone walks across the ballroom that Adelaide is in, and that has nothing to do with her, and you forget about it. And then in the second book, you might find out that was actually a spy who was walking through delivering some treasonous message. And so by the time you get through all these books, you're going to see how all these pieces fit together. And certainly at the ending, all three girls come together to complete that ending. And when you finish Adelaide's book, I'm sure people are going to have a lot of questions, like, where did Mira come from? She's there, and it's not sloppy writing. There's actually, there's a reason for it. And when you get to that book, you're going to be like, that's it. So it's a kind of different format that I think is pretty cool, and I hope others do too.
That's really interesting. You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline, and our guest today is Richelle Mead, author of the Glittering Court series, among many others. I'm wondering if do we learn more about in the other books about what I don't know how to pronounce her name, Ayana. Ayana, yeah, because I'm curious about her backstory too.
She has a fantastic backstory. Some characters get backstories of varying degrees. Some of them are, even I admit too, you give them a luck on roll. They have a pretty thin background, but she's someone that was very well developed, and we will see more of her in the second book. She has a larger role there. But let me back up a little bit to explain where she comes from. So when these people from Oxford, which is meant to resemble England, when they come to the New World, just like historically speaking, there are already people there, but that doesn't matter. They still try to colonize. And in this book, the group that's living there is actually, you'll see they more resemble a sort of Celtic race of people. And the idea in this book is that they were actually living in Oxford years ago, and then those people came as conquerors, chased them across the sea, and now the Australians have moved on to that world too, and are chasing them away again. And there were a couple motivations for that. One of them is that conquerors, historically speaking, rarely stop. They keep going and going, and so we see that with these poor people who are constantly being ousted from their land. And the other reason I wanted my group of people that are inspired by Native Americans, specifically those in Eastern tribes. I didn't want to focus on the aspect of their culture being destroyed, even though that's a critical, I think, and a very important part of American history that people need to be aware of. I wanted to see, what if there had been no genocide and no colonization? What would have happened to these wonderful civilizations if they'd been allowed to go on in peace? Where would they be 100 years later? And so the group this fictitious group is actually, sort of inspired by what would have happened if they had just gone on unmolested by Europeans. And so they're called the Belonquins, and they kind of are just doing something. They're kind of watching these colonists explore other lands, and they're keeping their distance, and they see themselves as a more civilized culture. And so that is where Ayana comes from. She's one of these people, the Belonquins, and she works for the Glittering Court in a lot of different ways. She's kind of a enforcer / bodyguard. She runs some business, and she also investigates girls who have been married to make sure that their marriages are happy and that the girls are being treated well. And so, yeah, she's a fascinating character. She could have her own book.
I think so too, and I like that aspect of making sure that the girls are treated well is part of this, because I think in other situations, the real life situations, that wasn't even part of the equation.
No, absolutely not. I mean, and that, I guess, that's my own wishful thinking. I wish it could have been that way in history, but obviously that's not been the case. That's not even the case nowadays, unfortunately. There's a lot of domestic abuse and emotional abuse that often goes on overlooked. And Ayanna herself comes from an abusive marriage originally, and so that's her motivation for getting involved with this.
I also really like that the girls actually do get to choose who they're going to marry, or even have the opportunity to sort of buy back their contract.
Yeah, ideally, when these girls come over and they're shown off and they go off on this social season, if they get multiple suitors, they can pick if it's someone who can pay the price that's been set on them. And so that's actually what motivates Adelaide, because even though she could have had an arranged marriage back in the old world, she had no choice in it. And so even that element of freedom and control is very, very appealing to her. And yeah, technically they can buy back their own contracts. Most girls wouldn't even consider it, because even though they've got this choice, it's that era where most people see marriage as a girl's lot. But Mira, as is referenced, and we find out, that's actually, she wants to do that. She would like to pick herself out of this contract and go on her merry way. But that's easier said than done, to come up with that much money when you're with this group of girls that's pretty much just going to parties. I mean, where do you get that money?
A good point. You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline, and our guest today is Richelle Mead, author of The Glittering Court.
That's a great title, by the way.
Yeah, did it take? Yeah, how did you come up with that title for not just the book, but for the business that the book is about?
Boy, I can't even tell you. It's one of those things. It's been so long. It just feels like it always was. I guess they're a business. They want to advertise, and they need kind of this compelling name, and so I had to make sure I had that covered. And they kind of have a jewel theme. One of the men who runs this business, calls them his jewels, and they are, the way they're ranked is by gemstone, and so the glittering kind of stuck. And that was the way it came. Glittering Court. It's a nice, romantic, imaginative title.
Yeah, it's a perfect name. I'm curious, when you've mentioned, or you've talked about the fact that there's 3 books in this series and that they are intertwined in terms of storyline. So, did you write one, then the other, and then the third, or were you writing them all sort of at the same time?
I wish I could have written them all at the same time. They're being done sequentially. I'm working on the second one right now. They were all plotted together. So I have whiteboards and paper, where I've got these timelines where I have to try very closely to match out key events in each girl's life. So, it's not a scene-for-scene matchup. As I was saying earlier, most of the time each girl is sort of, having her own adventures. And so I'd say like 75% of the books are that stories that we don't know yet. But, there is this spot where we overlap, and that had to be so carefully plotted, because those are kind of your touchstones to let you know where you are in the timeline and what's happening between them and what's happening at the time. It takes a lot of planning, and
I'll bet.
I got most of that down. But every once in a while, yes, I write this second book, I will run into something where I wish I could change it, but the first book is out and in print, and that becomes canon. And so if it contradicts that book, I have to shift it, because each book has to align with its predecessor. So I'm not sure what writing the third is going to be like. It'll probably be that times 2. If I run into any snags, it's going to have to make sure it meshes with the first 2.
So do you literally have whiteboards on the walls of the room that you write in that have the timelines?
I do. I have whiteboards in my office that I frequently use for plotting and outlining. I often start with the big ideas there, the plot points. It's like this little idea cloud, and then it turns into bullet points, and sometimes it will become a chapter-by-chapter sort of grid, and those big things eventually coalesce into my computer, a Word document that may be however many 15 pages long, that is my roadmap for the book. Chapter 1, Adelaide is sitting in her parlor, thinking about et cetera, and it's long text, it's not bullet points. And that's kind of my guide when I sit down to write. I need that for myself. I know some authors who have no plan for the day, sit down, and magic comes from their fingertips. I have to look at that, where I'm at in the book, and say, okay, here's what we're working on today.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, do you think many authors follow this plan that you have, or do they just kind of come off the top of their head?
It's a split. You'll run into all types. The colloquial way we refer to each other is plotters, like me. Answers, as in writing by the seats of their pants. So you hear that come up a lot at festivals and conventions. People talk about those differing philosophies.
Well, if you're gonna do this kind of a sequence book, I would think you'd have to have a plan. I mean, I can't imagine just going off,
Yeah.
without a plan.
Well, when you're starting, like the first book in the series, where you have a little more freedom of movement, how closely do you stick to the plan?
Pretty closely. That's not to say it's all, so strict that there's no freedom, but I rarely stray, and that is because the whole, like you said, for a series, my other ones are sequential. They really do build on each other, and if you've suddenly changed a big plot point in a book, I've got to make sure that's not rippling down and changing my original plan for the series. But little things, quirky things, and subplots sometimes arise, or a character's personality may develop in a way I didn't expect. And so little things like that, I rarely just suddenly halfway through change the whole course of the book and completely drop the outline. If I do get writer's block, it's not so much a lack of inspiration as I didn't do the outline correctly. I may not have developed something well enough or given enough detail. That's where I run into walls. Is my outline sort of fails me, and then I have to take a step back and say, okay, what needs to be repaired here?
Well, when you start a series, do you plot the entire series before you start writing the first book?
I do, not to that same level of detail that I just described, the 15-page document. But so take Vampire Academy, for example, which is a 6-book series. I knew what this journey was going to look like for the protagonist. I knew how she's starting out, and I knew how the last book was going to end. And there are several key points that are the big moments in her story, that those become sort of the endings for the books in the middle. And so I have a rough idea of how each book is getting to that point, but those books are not plotted in extreme detail at the beginning. That's just one book at a time, because little things happen along the way and you have to adjust. But I have to know what I'm building towards. Again, some authors don't, and they're figuring out their series as they go. I find more satisfaction in being able to see things that are leading toward the ending, and it feels right to me to be able to do that. That's my style.
My late husband used to call that critical path.
It was kind of like that, yeah.
Yeah, he was an engineer, and he had critical path if he was planning something.
And did he plan everything?
No, not everything, but a lot of things he did.
Yeah. So, Richelle, would you like to read from The Glittering Court for us today?
I have the book with me.
Oh. Well, then I guess the answer is no.
No one prepped me on that, so I'm afraid I can't. I don't have the book with me.
That's fine. So, how did you get started as a series writer?
I don't know how not to be a series writer. I mean, that's what I loved growing up. I loved series. To me, you build the world and you build the characters, and it becomes very, very epic. And
what were your favorite series growing
up?
What
I was going to write. My favorite series?
Yes.
When I was younger, I loved all the quote unquote girl books. Little House on the Prairie, Anne of Green Gables, a huge favorite. When I was older, an adolescent, I read a lot of sort of the sword and sorcery, high fantasy books, and those were very epic too.
Mm.
Those would build and build, and they would end on cliffhangers, and that's certainly something that's influenced me. I'm loved and hated for that by my readers, leading books off on that. But those were the things I definitely loved. Not that I didn't read standalones, I did, and I still will, but the series, that drive to find out what's happening next for the characters, has always kind of fueled me.
So what was your very first series?
My first series was, it's called the Georgina Kincaid series. That was an adult series, 6 books. The first one is Succubus Blues, and the premise for that is, for anyone not familiar with a succubus, is this mythological character, sometimes considered a demon, whose job it is to seduce men and possibly steal their souls. And so you've got this character, and the first book opens up, and it seems like it should be all sexy and evil, and there's certainly an aspect of that. But she's actually kind of depressed because she does not like her lot in life. She doesn't like ruining other people's lives, and she kind of wants to find love of her own. And so it was fun to have this juxtaposition of a character who should be dark, but who is a romantic, and who is goofy at times. There's a lot of silly parts in this series, which are just my wacky interpretation of creatures of hell. You wouldn't expect it, but at the same time, it's heartbreaking at times, and it is sad. And most of my series do oscillate between that, the funny and the deep. That's what, I don't know. It sounds cliche, but that's what life is. I feel like we swing between those.
Mm. And how did you get that published?
So let's see. This was back, 2005 is when I sold it, which is a very different era of publishing than now. But I went through the old-fashioned way. I got a literary agent, and you do that by sending a one-page query letter to the literary agent, usually in New York, trying to convince them that representing your book is the best thing ever. And you usually give a 2-paragraph pitch for it, which is extremely hard for novelists to do. You'll see a lot saying, I can't confine my book to 2 paragraphs or whatever, how long this letter is. But that's agents are inundated with that, and they reject about 98% of their queries because agents are not paid until the author is paid. So they have to make sure it's a book they believe in and think they can sell. So I did that, and I got a lot of rejections. And that's part of the game. And if an agent likes what you have to offer, they'll often request a partial manuscript or the entire manuscript, and then ideally you get an agent to represent you. So that's the first step, and that's what happened to me. I got an agent, and then the agent may have suggestions on your book or not, and then when it's ready, the agent takes it to publishers, and it's very much like what you did to the agents, except the agents are now doing it to the publishers. They're pitching to them and trying to convince them that that your book is the best thing ever, and publishers should buy it for lots and lots of money. And again, they get rejected, maybe they get accepted, and so that's what happened with Succubus Blues. My agent took it around, some rejections, got the offer that stuck, and that was how it got published.
So and that was your first published book, was Succubus Blues?
Yeah, Succubus Blues, yes.
And had you written more than the first book by that point, or did you have the book and then the outline for the rest of the series that you sold?
I had only written the first book. I knew in my head where I wanted to go, but that hadn't been pitched or anything. Lots of times you'll find publishers when they buy a book, they throw out a blanket offer for a set, and so my first one was for 3 books. They just assumed that there would be more in the Succubus series, and so they get written into the contract as untitled Succubus book or something like that. Oh. And as the process goes, and you're working with your editor on the first book, at some point they usually want to know at least an idea of what the next book will be about, because for their own promotion purposes, because they're doing book jackets and catalogs so far in advance of publication.
So Succubus Blues, was it the first book you wrote or just the first book you sold?
First book I sold. I had written a novel-length manuscript before that, and it was too sloppy. I had actually written it without an outline, and it showed. It kind of meandered. So that one was not sellable in its current state. And then I did Succubus Blues, and that was a much better, well-paced novel. But that first manuscript actually became the raw material for a later book of mine called Game Board of the Gods, which is an adult series. And that's my current active adult series right now. It has 2 books in it, and there's a third one eventually coming out, a date to be determined. But it was kind of nice. That book got saved after all, and that happens with a lot of authors. You find that you either get better or you get other opportunities to pull out those old books.
And what's the name of that series?
The series is called Age of X, X like the letter, and the first one is called Game Board of the Gods. And it's set in this. It's a futuristic world, not too space agey, not that kind of futuristic world, but it's our world maybe like 100 years from now, and so it's more advanced. But they've had a lot of events happen where they're very anti-religion because it's been seen as a bad thing for society, and so they're kind of this a-religious society, and then strange phenomena start happening, and essentially the gist is that the gods are returning to Earth, and so you've got a lot of these figures from world mythology playing a role, and the human characters are sort of caught up in the middle of it.
Wow. You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline. Our guest today is Richelle Mead, author of The Glittering Court. And, okay, I'm looking at the back cover of the book, and there's 6 Vampire Academy books. There are 6 books in the series Bloodlines. There's Soundless, which was a standalone, and you've just told us about 2 adult series, and now we have The Glittering Court, and all of that has been since 2005?
Yeah, that's amazing.
Technically since 2007, because that was when the first one came out, if you're looking at strictly a publication. The first ones were written a little ahead of that, but yeah, that's 26 books since 2007.
Boy, oh boy.
How do you do it?
Yeah, indeed.
Well, I mean, a lot of it's time management. You got to treat it as a job. There's this romantic image of authors. You kind of lie around and you wait for the muse to come, and that doesn't pay the bills. For me, I have to sit down each day, not quite 8 to 5, but those kinds of daytime work hours, especially since having kids. A lot of the bulk of that 26 number came when I was starting out. I didn't have kids, so I can do 3 or 4 books a year, and it's very easy to pull an all-nighter. Or, I don't see my significant other for a couple of days, because that's fine. Now that I have kids, it's a different story. They're off at daycare and preschool in the day, and I have a very finite number of hours to work, because when they walk through the door, it's all them, and the writing's done for me, and so that's very much forced me to be much better at time management. And I write much, fewer books now, 1 to 2 maybe, and so that has relaxed my schedule quite a bit because right now the books obviously are my vocation, but the kids are what get the priority on my time.
Wow. That still amazes me that you're able to write 1 to 2 books a year, because these don't look like things you're just dashing off. I mean, they're...
Although there's too many details, and I mean, gosh, just like in this Glittering Court, all the details about the dresses and everything that these girls wear, you know?
Are you a fashionista, Richelle?
I wouldn't say fashionista. I was pretty out of it with, like, a lot of pop culture and who's wearing what and designer labels. But, you know, I love clothes, and I like to shop, and I love romantic period pieces, movies and historical things. I love the costumes, and so that's just something I like to see in there.
Well, speaking of movies, have any of your books been made into movies or TV shows?
Vampire Academy was made into a movie back in 2014, I believe. I don't know why I'm blanking on that, but yeah, 2014 sounds right. Vampire Academy. It was not in theaters very long and not a big box office hit, but it sold an amazing amount of books. It's a great thing about any kind of exposure like that. It pulls in new readers, and it's on Netflix now, which is great because I have people come to me all the time at signings. They're like, I was browsing around, I saw it, and I decided to check out your books, and I love your books, and that's the best thing that I can hear as an author.
Did you have any involvement in the movie-making process?
I was asked questions on details about it, and I visited the set, but really when you've signed your rights over, your control is pretty minimal. That's not to say it's a cold, bad relationship, but it's the directors and the writers take over, and they have their own visions for how they'd like to see it turn out. But like I said, I was told a lot that was going on. I got to see the set and see it filmed, and that was a lot of fun.
When you went to see the movie, did it feel like that was your story up there?
Sometimes. I don't know. It's a real experience. I'm not sure I have the words to describe it. It's interesting because they change some things, and so it's kind of interesting to see, like, oh, okay, that's kind of a cool interpretation, and then they'll have some stuff lifted out word for word, and that's just like, wow, there it is. I wrote that. It's crazy. So it's definitely a one-of-a-kind experience. Is probably the best I can say.
I think it'd be very gratifying in a way.
It's to know that people are so invested in that they were moved to take that project on. It's definitely very cool.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that you have this adult series that's active, and you have the Glittering Court. Do you go back and forth writing books for the different series?
At the moment, the Glittering Court is my priority because that's got a bigger contract, and my YA stuff is what I'm more known for. So the adult stuff is still in there, but I guess to a lesser extent. So right now I'll knock out this next Glittering Court book before picking that up.
Are you able to write when you're on tour?
No, absolutely not. So that's always a problem because the writing comes grinding to a halt.
Yes, I imagine.
When I travel. So this has been 6 weeks, and even though I've had breaks in the middle of my trips, you're often just doing recovery to try to get your mind back. So hopefully I'll get back into it.
Well, promoting the book is really part of the job, isn't it?
It is, and I don't think it's obvious when people get into this business. A lot of writers are introverted, and you just want to hole up and write your book. And if you get some some success with that, you are suddenly put out into that extrovert position, I surprise myself sometimes. You're just kind of go adrenaline mode at these signings, talking and just rolling with the energy, and then I get back to my hotel and I'm like, what did I do? Is that me? I'm this introverted person, and but you're on stage for a couple hours or so.
Are you a bit of a rock star?
Am I a rock star?
Yeah, are you a rock star? A bit of a rock star. I mean, your books are very popular, and I'm sure you've got people who are really excited to see you.
Oh yeah, no, they're great, and definitely, there's a lot of enthusiasm. That's what makes writing for teens so much fun. Adults get excited too, but they're a little more reserved in how they show it, and so at the events, the teens are just. It's one of the wonderful things about them is they show how they feel, and they're excited, and they'll tell me. And there's definitely a lot of energy there, and they live for the characters, and that's a wonderful thing. You want what you write to have that effect.
So, Glittering Court came out about 6 weeks ago. This is a very different book than your other YA series. What kind of reaction have you gotten?
It's mixed. I think people wonder when you get a series that hits that's what you got into the business for, and I didn't get into to write Vampire Academy or any vampire book for the rest of my life. I love all genres. I have lots of ideas. Vampire Academy is the one that hit, so that's what's sort of given me my reputation. And so there are some fans who wish I would write them forever, but I have other fans who, they realize what they like about my work is the characterization, the way I draw characters, no matter the setting, that mix of wacky with heartbreaking. And so they recognize that even when the genres shift, they're still going to love that. And then if I do have someone who says, no, I'm only going to read vampire books forever, those people, I will have other people who've never heard of me shift into that newer genre. And so there's an ebb and a flow there. But to me, it's worth it. The things I write best are if I'm passionate about it.
So I know, Caroline, you really enjoyed reading this book.
I did, yeah. I really did. I got into it and I thought, well, could this really happen? And then I realized it could have.
Yeah.
It really could have happened.
Yeah. What, like I said, the details of the dresses, just the high society was fun to read about. But there was always this underlying current of danger. And
and also the personalities of the girls and how they interacted. One of them was really snipey, and so it was interesting to see how they turned out. It really was.
So, Richelle, out of these three main characters, do you have a favorite?
No, it's like picking kids. They're each so different, and they all have something so unique to offer. With their personalities, I don't think I could pick, and that's why they come together to make the whole stories. They're different pieces of it, and all have an equal strength.
Do you ever write male leading characters?
I do. So in Age of X, Game Board of the Gods, that's a third-person book, and we jump around in male and female characters' heads. And the rest of my books tend to be first person. And in the Bloodlines series, which is the spin-off to Vampire Academy, it's the same world but a different set of characters. One of them is male, and so we're in his head the whole time.
Well, Cedric is sort of a leading character in this.
Well, he's an important character, but
very important.
Yeah, he's important, but we're not in his head per se, but we definitely get to know him, and there's a few other guys coming down the line that are have really fascinating backstories too. So I'm excited to share those with people. And
of course, you have your heroine, but your villain you have a male and a female villain, mother and son.
Yeah. Villain aren't gender specific, right? We can we can go any way with them.
Yeah. Well, this was really a fun book to read, but it's more than just surface level because you've got that, that the religious aspect, which and the
historical,
like I said, the historical aspect.
Yeah,
that adds some depth to it, I think.
it really does.
Yeah. Well, we are out of time for today, and I wish you a safe journey to Chicago tomorrow.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you, and have a great reading, book signing tonight. And
we look forward to the next book.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. We'll make sure you get a copy.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. And if you're listening to us on Friday, and Mom, do you have some closing words for us?
Yeah, I like this one. I don't know who said this, but every person you meet knows something you don't. Learn from them.
And we will see you next week on Writers' Voices. And do check out writersvoices.com for past shows, anything that you missed.